5 of the most high-profile players announced they are filing an equal pay complaint against U.S. Soccer. The players claim to earn 40% of what their male counterparts do and assert they've been shortchanged on bonuses, appearance fees, and per diems, despite the fact that they are the driving economic force of U.S. Soccer over the last 2 years. In a response, U.S. Soccer says in part they are disappointed by this action. SI senior writer Grant Wahl is here to discuss. Grant, how strong of a case do the women have?
I think they've got a pretty decent argument when you look at what they're alleging here, which is that the U.S. men's team gets paid a lot more than the U.S. women's team does, and they have the details from the collective bargaining agreements. Now, the U.S. women have agreed to these collective bargaining agreements in the past, but what they're saying is in the negotiations for the new collective bargaining agreement, which has not been signed yet, U.S. Soccer has told them recently, we will not pay you the same as we pay the men. And that's what is precipitating the timing of this action that we see today.
There's been a few things kind of bubbling around the surface or near the surface when it comes to the U.S. women's national team and U.S. Soccer. Ultimately, where do you think this is headed?
Well, there's a lot going on right now. There's a court case in Chicago where they are literally trying to establish and get a court to establish whether the collective bargaining agreement still exists for the U.S. women's players. Now, U.S. Soccer says it does through the end of this year, after the Olympics, their big event this year. Now, the U.S. women's players say, no, it does not apply, that they signed a memorandum of understanding a couple of years ago, but that they have the right to not have the CBA still apply. Now, this court is going to make a decision in the next couple of months, probably early June. The big question here is, could the U.S. women strike before the Olympics? If they did that, if they had the right to do that according to this court, that gives them a lot of leverage than if they didn't have that right before the Olympics.
Very interesting, because the women have threatened to strike before. I mean, when they had to play on the artificial turf in Canada during the World Cup that they just won, they were very upset leading up to that event, and I think they felt that their complaint fell on deaf ears. Is this going to be something taken very seriously by U.S. Soccer? Are they going to try to brush it off under the rug?
I think they have to take this seriously. The lawyer for the U.S. women's players is Jeffrey Kessler. He's one of the most high-powered sports lawyers in the country, represented Tom Brady in the Deflategate case. He's front and center on this. And you know, he's also pointing out, when you look at U.S. Soccer's own figures over a 4-year cycle for the men and women on the revenues that are produced, according to the most recent figures, you're looking at, and this is projected over the next 2 years along with the last two, $60 million in revenues produced by the U.S. men versus $51 million by the U.S. women. Pretty close. So if you're actually using the argument that this should depend on what kind of revenues you produce, then it is pretty similar at this point. Now, there are others who argue that it shouldn't depend on how much you produce revenue-wise. This isn't women's tennis, which is a for-profit business. This is U.S. Soccer, a non-profit organization that competes in international competition.